Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight's journey carries us to a strange and tender corner of history, to glowing glass boxes on a carnival midway, to a doctor named Martin Couney, and to the tiniest lives the world once believed were never meant to last. It's a story of defiance dressed as compassion, proof that sometimes belief arrives before permission. If you find peace here, you're welcome to like or subscribe, simply a quiet way of keeping this gentle space alive. The room is quiet but for the ticking of a clock. A woman labors in the half light, her face pale, her fingers gripping the edge of a linen sheet. Outside, snow falls softly against the window panes. The slow rhythm of winter in a European city that has yet to believe in miracles. Inside, a midwife bends low, her expression already resigned. The child has come too soon. The baby's cry, when it arrives, is not a cry at all but a faint, trembling sound, like a moth fluttering against glass. The nurse shakes her head. She wraps the child in a cloth and lays her near the mother's breast, whispering a quiet prayer that has little expectation behind it. For in this time, in this century, such children are not expected to live through the night. It is the 1880s. Across Europe, progress hums through the streets. Trains thunder. Electric lamps bloom in the dark. Telegrams cross oceans. Yet in hospital wards, the smallest lives still flicker and fade unnoticed. Premature infants, weaklings, as some call them, are left to chance and faith. Doctors record their passing without sentiment. Science, for all its triumphs, has not yet turned its gaze toward the frailest of beginnings. In France, in Germany, in England, the story is the same. There are no machines to warm these tiny bodies, no methods to nourish them safely. The medical textbooks speak in absolutes. Nature has chosen, and the physician must not interfere. Compassion, though present in whispers, has no protocol, no instrument to wield. Yet somewhere, in the quiet corners of certain minds, doubt stirs. In a Paris hospital, a physician named Stephen Tarnier stands beside a row of bassinets, his breath misting in the cold morning air. He has seen too many small coffins carried through these corridors, too many mothers leave with empty arms. He believes that warmth, simple warmth, might be the difference between life and loss. His idea is met with laughter at first. You cannot save what nature rejects, a colleague tells him. But Tarnier does not laugh. Instead, he visits the Paris Zoo. There, in the aviary, he studies an incubator designed for baby chicks, a contraption that provides steady heat through circulating warm air. He wonders, with quiet audacity, if what shelters the fragile life of a bird might also shelter the fragile life of a human. He has an incubator built, a wooden box with a glass window and compartments for hot water. It is crude, simple and small. And into this warm cradle, he places a premature infant. The baby survives, then another, and another. Word spreads softly at first, through the hospital corridors. Tarnier's box saves lives. Still, the world does not yet believe. Doctors frown at the thought of infants being treated like specimens in glass. Some call it unnatural, an interference with destiny. Others argue it is indecent to display such weakness, to prolong what is meant to fade. But for every skeptic, there is a mother who holds her living child and whispers gratitude into the folds of the blanket. One of Tarnier's students, Pierre Constant Boudin, watches these small victories with reverence. He records every breath, every heartbeat, every detail of warmth and nourishment. To him, these children are not curiosities, they are living proof that care can be science. He writes, The child born before its time is not condemned, it is simply waiting for the world to catch up. And in time, one young man would come to listen, a restless student named Martin Couney. But that is still far away. For now, the world is only beginning to stir from its indifference. In the dim wards of Europe's hospitals, rows of mothers sit beside small wooden cradles, watching candlelight flicker over the faces of their sleeping infants. Nurses move quietly through the corridors, carrying bowls of warm water and folded cloths. The smell of milk, soap, and burning oil mingles in the air. It is not yet modern medicine, but it is love learning to speak the language of science. Outside, the age of invention accelerates. Telegraphs sing across continents. Engineers dream of flight. But here, in these quiet rooms, another revolution is taking shape. One that measures progress not in machines or empires, but in heartbeats. And yet, so fragile is the bridge between belief and ridicule. In London, some physicians deride these new baby boxes, claiming they coddle the weak and encourage false hope. In Berlin, a medical journal dismisses the practice as sentimental folly. But a few souls persist. Young doctors, nurses, mothers who have seen the impossible made possible. One nurse, years later, recalls her first glimpse of a surviving premature baby. "I thought she looked like a flame," she says. "So small I feared a breath would extinguish her. But she lived, and I learned then that flame is not weakness, but persistence." This slow awakening, part science, part faith, begins to ripple outward. Hospitals start to replicate Tanya's design. Boudin refines the incubator, adding regulated airflow, measuring temperature with precision. He opens consultations for nurslings in Paris, teaching mothers how to care for their premature babies with both tenderness and discipline. His lectures are crowded not only with doctors but with ordinary women who long to understand the mysteries of life and loss. Still, the acceptance is partial, uneven. For every child saved, many more die unseen. For every mind enlightened, another closes in pride. Medicine, like all human endeavors, advances not in leaps but in small, trembling steps. The turn of the century approaches. In a modest laboratory, Boudin continues his work. He believes that one day, incubators will be in every hospital, that the fragile will no longer be forgotten. He mentors young students who share his vision. Among them, stories say, stands a man who listens more than he speaks, eyes alive with quiet fire. His name is Martin Couney, but that will come later. For now, the story remains in the hush of hospital wards, in the flickering lamplight over wooden boxes, in the first breath of a child once thought too small for this world. The fragile have begun to live, and with each small survival, the world learns a little more about mercy. Beyond the hospitals and the quiet wards, a young man begins to dream, not of machines or fame, but of a world where compassion itself might be put on display. Soon, that dream will carry him from Europe to the edge of belief. The city hums with progress. Berlin, late 19th century, a world of invention and pride. Steam curls from factory stacks. Gas lamps tremble above cobbled streets. Medical schools, once quiet cathedrals of anatomy, are now engines of ambition. Young men in pressed coats hurry through lecture halls, their futures written in scalpel strokes and Latin notes. Among them is Martin Couney. He walks quickly, head down, notebooks pressed against his chest. His teachers call him diligent but distracted, a student whose eyes often drift toward windows rather than chalkboards. Yet what occupies his mind is not the neat order of diagrams, but the chaos of life itself, fragile, uneven, unpredictable. He studies obstetrics and pediatrics, but the field offers him little comfort. Too many of his lectures end with the same resigned conclusions: premature infants are non-viable. Nature's mistakes, a phrase delivered with the same sterile calm as a weather report. But something in Couney recoils at that indifference. He has seen what they call non-viable, tiny forms, trembling, still warm, still reaching. And he wonders, even then, if helplessness is not in the child but in the doctor. He reads late into the night, candles burning to stubs. In his books, he finds data but no mercy. In his teachers, precision but no hope. And so, restless and hungry for something unnamed, he looks beyond Germany's proud institutions and toward whispers from the West. Of a French physician who refuses to surrender the smallest lives to fate, Pierre Constant Boudin. The name reaches him like an echo through the medical journals of the day. Boudin's Paris clinic is said to house strange devices, heated boxes, transparent with water tanks and dials. Some mock them as curiosities, others as blasphemy against nature's law. But the rumors also tell of infants who lived because of them. One morning, in a letter written on crisp stationery, Couney requests permission to study in Paris. It is a decision that surprises his professors and disappoints his peers. Boudin's experiments. One mentor scoffs. Theatrics. There is no science in sentiment. But Couney is unmoved. There is something in those words. No science in sentiment. That burns within him like a quiet challenge. When he arrives in Paris, the city seems to breathe differently, lighter, faster, alive with ideas. It is the 1890s, and everything feels possible. Art spills from Montmartre studios, the Eiffel Tower pierces the clouds, and in the maternity wards of the Charité Hospital, revolution hums beneath the silence of careful hands. Boudin is not what Couney expects. He is neither a prophet nor a showman, but a calm, precise man who measures hope as carefully as temperature. His ward smells faintly of disinfectant and milk. Along the walls stand a row of glass boxes, the incubators. Each hums with a gentle warmth. Inside them, infants sleep, wrapped in soft cloths, their breaths small clouds upon the glass. Nurses move like shadows, checking thermometers, adjusting valves, whispering lullabies. Couney stands at the threshold, his heart caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. They live, Boudin tells him quietly, without turning from his work. It is not magic, only warmth, patience, and care. That moment changes everything. He studies under Boudin for months that turn into years. He learns how to regulate temperature, how to feed infants drop by drop, how to balance science with tenderness. He learns that precision can serve love, that the smallest turn of a valve might mean the difference between life and death. But what moves him most is not the machinery. It is Boudin himself, the steady devotion in his every gesture, the refusal to harden his heart in the face of suffering. Boudin's lectures are quiet yet electric. You will be told, he says to his students, that such lives are not worth saving, that resources are better spent elsewhere. But progress, true progress, begins the moment we stop asking whether life is worth saving and simply save it. For Couney, these words strike deeper than any anatomy lesson. He feels something awaken in him, a conviction that medicine is not merely the study of bodies, but the defense of the vulnerable. Still, He is aware that the world beyond this ward does not yet believe. The newspapers mock Bedtime's baby ovens. Hospitals resist funding. Some accuse him of spectacle, of exploiting pity. And Couney sees in his mentor's quiet perseverance the outline of his own future. The price of defying certainty. One winter night, a nurse brings in a child so small she seems made of air. Her skin is translucent, her eyes unopened. The mother weeps at the bedside, whispering prayers to saints who rarely answer. Boudin lifts the infant gently, his voice calm. "We will give her warmth," he says. "The rest belongs to her." Couney watches through the long hours of the night as the incubator's window clouds with condensation. He sees the child's chest rise and fall, each breath a rebellion. And when morning comes, and she is still alive, something irreversible takes root in him. He begins to think less like a student and more like a believer. When his studies end, Boudin places a hand on his shoulder. "You have a gift," he tells him. But gifts are tested by disbelief. The world changes slowly, Martin. Sometimes it must be persuaded not by argument, but by wonder. Those words stay with him. He leaves Paris with more than a certificate. He carries an idea that if reason cannot convince the world to care, perhaps the heart can. That to save the fragile, one must make the indifferent see them. Back in Germany, his peers laugh when he speaks of incubators. They say his French education has filled his head with sentimentality. But Couney only smiles. He is already dreaming beyond lecture halls, beyond hospitals that close their doors too quickly. He imagines a place where the public can witness what medicine ignores. A stage not for entertainment, but for revelation. He sketches designs for improved incubators, simpler and more reliable. He writes letters, proposes exhibitions, envisions a pavilion of life in the midst of spectacle. He does not yet know it, but the path he is drawing will one day lead him to a strange stage beneath the roar of a carnival. To Coney Island, where belief will wear the mask of wonder. For now, he is still a young man in Europe, standing at the border of faith and science. The nights are long, the doubts are many. But in the quiet of his small apartment, he lights a candle and watches the flame tremble behind glass, fragile, steady, alive. He smiles to himself, thinking of Boudin's words that progress begins when we choose to save, not to judge. And though he does not yet know the weight of what lies ahead, he senses it. The calling, the quiet rebellion of care. The dream has begun to breathe. Beyond the lamplit streets of Paris, ships wait in harbours, bound for a world that worships spectacle. Soon, Martin Couney will follow them, carrying with him not machines, but a vision. That compassion, if made visible, might just change the world. The year is 1896. Berlin gleams with the fever of the new century, a city draped in banners and brass, a capital of invention poised between the gaslight and the age of electricity. The great industrial exposition rises like a steel cathedral in the heart of the city, its halls echoing with the promise of progress. Steam engines hiss, gears turn, lights flicker to applause. Here, the future is not imagined. It is displayed. Visitors move through the vast pavilions in awe. They come to see the marvels of human ingenuity. Machines that sew, engines that fly, telegraphs that speak across oceans. The air smells of coal smoke and roasted almonds, and beneath it all hums the steady pulse of human pride, the belief that man has mastered nature itself. And yet, amid all this noise and glory, one small pavilion stands quietly apart. Its sign is modest, its colours pale against the brilliance of the fair. Infant Incubator Exhibit. It reads, in careful lettering. Most passers-by glance at it with confusion, expecting perhaps another mechanical wonder, another trick of steam or light. But inside waits something different, something alive. Martin Couney stands at the entrance. He is 30 years old, dressed in a dark suit that seems too heavy for the warmth of the day. His expression is calm but alert, a man both host and guardian. Behind him, the soft hum of machines fills the room. Not the groan of engines, but the rhythmic breathing of tiny miracles. Rows of glass boxes line the walls, each one warmed by carefully regulated pipes of circulating water. Inside them lie premature infants, impossibly small, their skin translucent, their fingers curled like tendrils of air. Nurses move quietly between the incubators, adjusting valves, feeding with droppers, whispering soothing words. The first visitors enter hesitantly. Their footsteps soften as they step closer. They had come for spectacle, but here they find stillness. The murmurs begin. Are they real? Someone asks. Couney nods. They are real, he says gently, and they are living. The crowd leans closer. Behind the glass, a baby stirs, her chest rising and falling like a wave no bigger than a breath. The sight disarms them. For a moment, the fair's din fades, replaced by the quiet rhythm of life itself. Couney explains the purpose of the incubators. How warmth, steady and clean, gives these infants the chance that nature alone would deny them. He speaks not as a showman, but as a witness to wonder. His German is deliberate, tinged with the softness of France, his words carrying both science and tenderness. This, he tells them, is not an exhibition of machines. It is an exhibition of hope. The phrase settles over the crowd like dust in sunlight. Hope? In a hall devoted to progress, it feels strangely human, almost sacred. Yet not everyone is moved. A few doctors from the Berlin Medical Society stand near the back, their arms crossed, their faces composed. One mutters, "Sentimental farce." Another notes, publicity is not medicine. They write in their notebooks. Their skepticism neat, efficient. But the mothers in the crowd understand. Some weep quietly. Others press their hands against their throats as if holding in a prayer. One woman, having lost a child months before, stands transfixed before the glass, whispering to no one, if only. Couney watches her. He knows her face well, the mix of wonder and ache. He has seen it in Paris, in hospital corridors, in the eyes of those who believed too late. This, he thinks, is why the exhibit must exist, to make visible what the world refuses to see, that life begins fragile, but never undeserving. Throughout the day, visitors return, bringing friends, bringing questions. Children peer in, wide-eyed. Journalists take notes, photographers adjust their tripods. The air grows thick with heat and curiosity. By evening, word spreads across the fairgrounds of the miracle babies in the quiet pavilion. Crowds swell. The line stretches out into the summer dusk. Vendors outside sell lemonade and roasted nuts. And within, the small room glows, warm and steady as a heartbeat. Behind the glass, the infants sleep on. Some of them will not live. Couney knows this. Not all can be saved. The nurses know it too. They care for each child as though time itself could be persuaded to hold still. Every breath is counted, every shift in colour, every tremor of tiny limbs. The work is tireless, unending. But to them, it is holy. In moments between visitors, Couney adjusts a thermometer, straightens a blanket. His hands tremble slightly, not from exhaustion, but from awe. He remembers Boudin's words, that progress begins when we choose to save, not to judge. And here, in this unlikely sanctuary of steel and glass, that truth glows. At night, after the crowds leave, the pavilion grows silent again. The fair outside dims to a murmur of music and wind. Couney sits by one of the incubators, watching a child whose pulse flickers like a candle's flame. "You will live," he whispers, not as a promise, but as a prayer. He is not unaware of the irony, that he has turned medicine into spectacle. But perhaps, he thinks, spectacle is the only language the world understands. If compassion must wear the costume of curiosity to be heard, then so be it. Days pass. The Berlin summer grows hotter, and so do the machines. The nurses fan themselves, the air thick with effort and devotion. Doctors continue to visit, some skeptically, some secretly intrigued. Newspapers print cautious articles. Strange experiment at the exposition. Infants displayed in glass cases. The headlines make it sound grotesque, but the public does not read it that way. They come, they keep coming, and slowly something shifts. A physician from Dresden visits and asks for blueprints of the incubators. A nurse from Vienna requests training. Letters arrive from hospitals asking for details of the Couney method. Even the Berlin Medical Society sends a representative, not to mock, but to understand. By the fair's end, more than a dozen infants have been saved. Their mothers visit daily, sitting quietly by the windows, their eyes bright with gratitude and disbelief. When they leave, they kiss Couney's hand. He tries to protest, but his voice falters. The last evening of the exposition arrives. Outside, fireworks bloom over the fairgrounds, bursts of colour against the night. Inside, the incubators glow with their own small constellations. The crowd thins, the music fades. Couney walks between the glass boxes one last time, his reflection mingling with the faint forms within. He thinks of Berlin, proud, skeptical, magnificent. He thinks of Boudin, of Paris, of the path that brought him here. And he wonders, as the final sparks die in the sky, if the world might now begin to see what he has seen all along, that the smallest life can be the greatest proof of progress. Outside, the fair's gates close. Tomorrow, the workers will dismantle the pavilions, the engines, the tents. But the image of those tiny lives behind glass, the fragile breathing of hope made visible, will not vanish so easily. Somewhere in the crowd, a young doctor who visited the exhibit will later build an incubator in his own ward. A nurse will tell her students about the fair where babies lived. And the name Martin Couney will begin to travel. Whispered, disputed, half believed, a legend forming quietly beneath the noise of modernity. The Berlin Exposition will fade into memory, but for those who entered that small, glowing room, something lingers. They have seen the future, not in engines or iron, but in breath and warmth and faith. And for Couney, standing at the threshold as the last lights dim, there is no triumph, only stillness. He bows his head, listening to the faint hum of machines that sound almost like lullabies. He thinks not of Berlin, but of where this light might go next. Across oceans, across doubt. Beyond the fairgrounds, ships wait in the harbour, bound for America, a land that loves wonder more than wisdom. Soon, Martin Couney will follow, carrying his fragile miracles across the sea and offering them once more to a world that does not yet know how much it needs them. In the late 1890s, the world hums with invention, with telegraphs, trams, and dreams made of steam. But medicine, that ancient custodian of life and death, remains slow to change. In hospitals across Europe, premature infants are still left to fate, too frail, too soon, too costly to save. The doctors shake their heads, their verdicts absolute. Nature, they say, must take its course. And yet, in the shadowed corners of that certainty, something tender stirs. Martin Couney stands between two worlds, the cold authority of science and the soft insistence of mercy. His pavilion in Berlin, though small, has already whispered its defiance. Behind glass walls, tiny figures breathe where none were expected to. And though mothers weep with gratitude, the men of medicine turn away. They call him a showman, not a scientist, a merchant of pity, a dreamer with delusions of grandeur. He reads their words in newspapers and hears them in the polished hallways of medical congresses. A carnival doctor, one says with a smirk. Turning tragedy into theatre, says another. But Couney knows what they do not. That the true spectacle is not the display of the weak, but the blindness of the learned. Each morning, he walks into his exhibit before the fairgrounds open. The air is still, thick with the scent of machinery and fresh linen. The incubators hum softly, their brass fittings glinting under the lamplight. The babies, some no bigger than his hand, stir beneath their cotton blankets. The nurses move quietly, their faces solemn and watchful, as if attending an altar rather than an experiment. He checks the thermometers, adjusts a valve. Every detail matters. Every moment of warmth, every measured breath. These are his arguments. Silent, breathing proofs that challenge the arrogance of indifference. Outside, the city clatters awake. Inside, time slows. He remembers his days under Bedtime in Paris, the steady voice of a man who believed that compassion could stand beside reason. Bedtime had once told him, "The smallest lives remind us of our duty to care, not to calculate." Couney carries that sentence like a prayer, but conviction is a lonely country. The letters from colleagues grow colder. Some refuse to acknowledge his work at all. Others send veiled warnings. Do not make a spectacle of suffering. He writes back, trying to explain that it is not suffering on display. It is survival. It is the stubborn spark that refuses to die. They never reply. So he builds a world where the public becomes witness. If the doctors will not listen, perhaps the people will. He opens his exhibits not to shock, but to show. Not to entertain, but to awaken. Visitors step into the soft glow of the incubator ward expecting to see tragedy. What they find instead is tenderness. The quiet rhythm of breath, the steady hum of heat, the fragile courage of a child gripping the edge of existence. The nurses' hands move like lullabies. The mothers sit, eyes full of wonder and fear. And as the crowd leaves, something shifts. The laughter fades to silence. The spectators depart not as thrill seekers, but as believers. Still, the criticism grows louder. Journalists accuse him of exploiting grief for fame. Medical journals refuse to cite his work. If it is not published, one editor says it cannot be proven. Couney smiles at that, a wary, sad kind of smile. For what proof does a heart need when it sees a child once dying, now alive? At night, when the fairgrounds fall silent, he walks the narrow rows between incubators. The machines tick softly like distant clocks. He leans close to one tiny face, pale and luminous in the gaslight. A girl, born at 6 months, her skin translucent as silk, her eyelids flutter, her breath shallow. The nurse whispers that the doctors gave her a day at most. It has been a week. Couney stands there, watching her chest rise and fall, so slight it might be imagined. He feels the familiar ache, that quiet, relentless hope that borders on prayer. "Hold on," he murmurs, though she cannot hear him. The world is cruel, but not all of it. Beyond the walls, thunder rolls. A storm gathers over Berlin, lightning reflecting off the glass. For a moment, the incubators glow brighter, as if the heavens themselves were peering in. He thinks of all the men who dismissed him, of the halls where intellect is worshipped but empathy is exiled. He does not hate them. In truth, he understands them. To feel too deeply, to question too much, these are dangerous habits in a profession built on control. But medicine, he believes, should not be only about mastery. It should also be about mercy. That belief costs him friendships, credibility, and peace, but it gives him purpose. Months pass, the exposition closes. The incubators are dismantled, crated, and shipped away. The fairgrounds fall silent, their echoes lingering in the empty halls. And yet, word of his work travels quietly, like rumor carried on wind. Mothers write letters. Newspapers publish photographs. Across Europe, people begin to ask questions. Why can't our hospitals do the same? The medical elite grow uneasy. The boundary between science and compassion has blurred. And Martin Couney, with his stubborn kindness, has drawn the line with glass and breath. In time, even some of his critics soften. A few visit in secret, slipping through side doors to watch. They stand there, uncertain as the incubators hum and the tiny lives move within. For a moment, theory falters. One doctor, silent for years, finally writes a letter. Perhaps there is something here worth learning after all. Couney does not frame the letter. He tucks it into a drawer. Beneath his notes and sketches, what he treasures more are the faces. The ones who lived, the ones who didn't, the mothers who came back to thank him, and the fathers who could barely speak for tears. He begins to think less of proving and more of persevering. The world will mock him, misunderstand him, and misname him, but the work will continue. For it is not applause that keeps the incubators warm. It is belief. The fairgrounds may close, the newspapers may sneer, but the hum of those machines, that quiet hymn of hope, will not stop. And in that hum, Martin Couney begins to dream again, of other cities, of other fairs, of a world that might yet listen. Soon, that dream will cross an ocean, to a place of noise and neon where hope will find its loudest stage, and the man they mocked in Berlin will become, against all odds, the doctor of Coney Island. The sea is a restless mirror, and upon it sails a man with a strange cargo. Inside the ship's hold, among trunks and tools, rest the fragile machines that hold his faith, glass boxes meant not for display, but for breath. The Atlantic roars beneath him, dark and endless, and Martin Couney stands at the rail, feeling the spray of salt upon his face. The year is 1901, and the world feels as if it is turning a new page. He is leaving behind a Europe of skepticism, a continent of marble universities and cold wards, where new ideas often suffocate before they breathe. In Berlin, they had called him a dreamer. In Paris, a showman. But in America, he has heard dreams and spectacle walk hand in hand. Perhaps there, compassion will not need to beg permission from pride. The ship creaks with life. Around him, immigrants huddle in thick coats. Their faces turn toward the horizon, toward the promise of the new world. Some carry bread, some a photograph, some only a prayer. Each seeks a second birth. Couney watches them, seeing in their hope a reflection of his own work. They, too, are fragile beginnings, small lives the world does not yet know how to care for. At night, he writes by lamplight in a small cabin that smells of iron and salt. His handwriting wavers with the waves. Incubators to America, he writes. Perhaps there people will listen. The ink pools like thought. He dreams not of fame, but of warmth, of rooms filled with soft light and softer breathing. The voyage is long, the sea endless. But within that vastness, Couney finds clarity. He thinks of Bedtime, his teacher in Paris, who once said, "Science must serve the soul, or it is nothing." He thinks of the babies he has seen, their fingers curling like the first tendrils of spring, their lives measured in ounces and hours. He knows they are miracles not of medicine, but of belief. When the ship finally nears New York, morning breaks like a promise. The skyline rises from the mist, spires, smoke, and the glimmer of something new. The Statue of Liberty stands like an outstretched hand, and Couney, leaning on the rail, feels the stir of something both strange and familiar, welcome. The docks swarm with motion, carts, cries, the metallic music of progress. Steam curls through the air as he steps onto the pier, one small figure among thousands. Yet in his mind he carries a cathedral, not of stone, but of glass. Within it, the fragile will live. He finds lodging near the Battery, where the air smells of bread and coal. He walks the streets for hours, studying this new land. America is loud, a carnival without walls. Newsboys shout headlines, streetcars hum. Electric lights buzz like captured stars. Everything gleams with hunger for what is new. Here, invention is not doubted. It is celebrated. Couney feels an odd kinship with this chaos. He begins writing letters to hospitals, proposing demonstrations, exhibitions, partnerships. Few reply. Those who do are polite but distant, unproven. They write. Unorthodox. Some still call him a fraud, a pretender. But he knows better than to despair. Ridicule is the gatekeeper of revelation. It is at a physicians' gathering in Chicago that he first hears of Coney Island. A place of wonder, they say, where people walk on air, where elephants dance and dreams are built in light bulbs. To others it sounds vulgar. To Couney, it sounds perfect. A place where the heart of science might beat beside the laughter of the crowd. He writes to the showman, explaining his exhibit. Incubators, nurses, living infants. Not a circus, he insists, but a sanctuary. They agree to meet him, intrigued more by curiosity than conviction. When they see the incubators, polished glass and shining brass, they marvel at their beauty. Machines that look like miracles. And in truth, they are. He explains his plan. Parents will bring their premature infants those hospitals refuse to treat. His staff will care for them, day and night. The entrance fee, a quarter, will fund their survival. The crowd's fascination will pay for mercy. It sounds absurd, yet something in his eyes disarms them. They give him a space for the summer season. In the weeks that follow, Couney walks along the empty boardwalk, imagining what will soon be built. The sea crashes behind him, the wind full of gulls. He envisions the rows of glass cases glowing in the dark, tiny lives sustained by faith and electricity, a sanctuary disguised as a sideshow. He writes again to Europe, arranging for nurses trained in the Paris maternity wards. He imports incubators, sterilizers, thermometers, a moving hospital disguised as spectacle. He works tirelessly, a conductor preparing an orchestra no one yet understands. Sometimes, in the quiet of evening, He sits by the window of his small room and listens to the city below. The clatter of hooves, the distant horns on the Hudson. He wonders what Bedtime would say, what his old professors might think. Then he smiles faintly. They would scoff, perhaps, but one day they will see. When the crates finally arrive from overseas, he stands among them in the dockyard, the air thick with sawdust and sunlight. The incubators gleam faintly through their wrappings, fragile as hope itself. He touches the glass gently, as though greeting old friends. Soon they will glow again. Soon the impossible will be visible once more. He hires carpenters, electricians, nurses. The exhibit takes shape, part clinic, part theatre, all compassion. The walls are whitewashed, the machines aligned with precision. And in the centre of it all, Couney places a small chair from which he will watch, teach, and guard. The newspapers begin to whisper. A doctor's nursery at the carnival. Infants on display. Some call it grotesque. Others fascinating. Couney does not answer. He knows that judgment will always arrive before understanding. What matters is the life inside the glass, not the opinion outside it. On the eve of the grand opening, he walks the boardwalk alone. The lamps flicker. The smell of salt and popcorn mingles in the air. Somewhere beyond, a carousel plays a slow waltz. He pauses, watching the horizon fade into twilight. The ocean he once crossed now murmurs beside him, as if to say, "You have arrived?" He closes his eyes and imagines the morning. The crowd gathering, the nurses tending, the tiny cries behind the glass. In this place of wonder and noise, he will build silence, the sacred hush of survival. The fairgrounds may roar, but inside his pavilion, the heart of humanity will beat softly, persistently against indifference. For now, he breathes in the salt air the hum of the world's new century. Tomorrow, the lights will rise, and the show of mercy will begin. Beyond the horizon, the boardwalk awaits. A ribbon of light and laughter where compassion will wear the mask of spectacle. The summer air over Coney Island hums like a living thing, warm, electric, thick with salt and laughter. The boardwalk stretches out beneath the rising sun, planked with footprints and promise. Above it, banners flap like bright wings, painted with words of wonder. The human cannonball, the great Ferris wheel, the infant incubator exhibit. Martin Couney stands before the newest of these signs, his hat in hand, the morning wind tugging gently at his coat. The words look strange even to him, both audacious and tender. Behind the canvas walls, his small pavilion waits, gleaming and immaculate, filled not with illusion, but with life. Inside, the air is hushed, as if the fair's noise cannot quite cross the threshold. Sunlight filters through gauze curtains, turning the dust into golden motes. Along one wall, a line of incubators hum quietly. Rectangular cradles of glass and brass, warmed by the steady breath of machinery. Within them, tiny bodies stir, wrapped in linen, their skin translucent as petals. The nurses move among them with the precision of ritual. They wear crisp white uniforms, caps folded like wings. Each gesture is deliberate, the slow turn of a dial, the soft press of a fingertip to a brow. Their tenderness seems to belong to another world, one far gentler than the one outside. Couney walks among them silent, his gaze drifting from one child to the next. Every breath, every flicker of a pulse feels like a defiance whispered into the noise of the age. Here, in this small sanctuary of glass, he is not performing, he is praying, not to any god, but to the fragile persistence of life itself. Then the hour strikes, and the fair awakens. Outside, the sounds swell, Colliope music, laughter, the rattle of roller coasters. The gates open, and the crowd floods in, a tide of faces, hats, and voices carrying curiosity like a current. Some come for thrill, others for warmth, some simply to see the strange new thing the papers have begun to whisper about. The baby show of Coney Island. A sign by the entrance reads, "All the babies here were born too soon. They live because of science and compassion." Below it, another line. Admission, 25 cents. Couney greets the first visitors himself. They hesitate, surprised by the cleanliness, the quiet. Some smile nervously, others remove their hats in instinctive reverence. He explains how the incubators work, how controlled warmth and clean air can coax the smallest lungs to breathe. He speaks gently, not as a lecturer, but as a father explaining something sacred. As he talks, people press closer to the glass cases. A young couple stares at one of the infants. A girl no bigger than a loaf of bread, her hands opening and closing like slow flowers. "She's alive?" the woman whispers. Couney nods. Alive and growing stronger. Word spreads quickly across the boardwalk. Soon the exhibit is full. Mothers, children, men with cigars, sailors on leave. Some lean close to the glass, their eyes wide with wonder. Others stand back, uneasy, unsure if they are intruding on something too private to be seen. Yet all are moved. What they expected to be a curiosity becomes something else entirely. An encounter with tenderness. Outside, barkers shout, the Ferris wheel creaks and the ocean glitters. Inside, the hum of the incubators continues. Steady, patient, merciful. In the evenings, when the lamps are lit, the pavilion glows softly from within. From the midway, it looks almost celestial, a long, low lantern shimmering with life. Visitors pause as they pass, drawn by the strange stillness amid the noise. The fair is all sound and movement, but Couney's exhibit seems to hold time itself in its hands. Sometimes, the showmen from neighboring attractions visit after hours. They joke, offering cigars, teasing him about his quiet little circus. He laughs with them, though there is something distant in his smile. "My performers," he says, gesturing toward the incubators, "do not know they are performing. But they are the bravest of us all." The weeks unfold like the rhythm of a lullaby. The nurses work in shifts, their hands steady even as exhaustion deepens. They feed the infants with droppers, bathe them in warmed water, weigh them daily. Their care is constant, almost invisible, the kind of devotion that does not seek witness. And yet, witnesses come. Families begin arriving from across the city. Mothers carrying babies hospitals have refused. Fathers holding hope like a fragile thing. They wait outside the exhibit, pleading, weeping, begging Couney to take their child. He never turns them away. The gates that open for amusement become gates of mercy. Within weeks, the exhibit has taken on the rhythm of a small hospital. Nurses sing softly as they work. The hum of machines blends with the murmur of prayer. Visitors leave money in envelopes, letters of thanks pinned to the walls. A priest stops by each Sunday, blessing the infants through the glass. Still, not all understand. Some newspaper columnists call it exploitation. Others question Couney's motives. "Is this science or show?" they ask. Couney does not answer. He believes the answer lives in the breath of each child, not in words. If seeing life stirs the conscience, he tells one reporter, then let them come and see. At night, when the crowds have gone and the lights dim, Couney sits alone among the incubators. The ocean air drifts through the open windows, cool and faintly sweet. He watches the machines breathe warmth into the fragile bodies within. Each one, he knows, was once a sentence of death rewritten into possibility. Sometimes he thinks of his homeland, of the halls where men in white coats dismissed him, of the laughter that followed him out of Europe. He feels no bitterness, only a quiet certainty that here, amid the chaos of the carnival, is where medicine has found its heart again. By the end of the summer, dozens of infants have gone home alive. Mothers carry them out through the turnstiles, their faces radiant, their arms trembling. Visitors cheer softly as they pass, tipping their hats. The boardwalk crowds may forget the details, but they will remember the light, the sight of life shining behind glass. Couney keeps careful records, names, birth weights, survival rates. Each success strengthens his resolve, each death deepens his humility. They teach us, he tells his nurses, not how to save but how to keep trying. Autumn arrives, the crowds thin. The sea wind grows colder, sharper, yet the exhibit remains open, its doors glowing against the dusk. He refuses to close it, not while there are still parents who knock at midnight, clutching the small bundles that no one else will take. One evening, as the season wanes, a child in the farthest incubator stirs and begins to cry. A thin, quivering sound that cuts through the hum of machines. Couney rises, walks to the glass, and listens. Outside, fireworks explode above the ocean, scattering red and gold across the sky. He looks between the two, the infant's cry and the fleeting light, and feels something close to grace. In the distance, laughter carries over the boardwalk, but inside the pavilion, time holds still. Every heartbeat is a quiet rebellion, every breath a victory. He knows this is only the beginning. The exhibit will grow, the world will come to see, and maybe, just maybe, medicine will learn to listen to the cries it once ignored. Outside, the boardwalk sings with noise and light, but within the pavilion, the hum of mercy endures, steady as a heartbeat. Soon, that hum will echo beyond the carnival, into the cities and hospitals of the world. The seasons turn, and Coney Island changes with them. New rides rise like monuments to wonder. New songs spill from gramophones. New faces crowd the boardwalk, chasing brightness. But one thing remains. The small white pavilion with its steady hum, its soft light glowing through curtains like the lantern of a saint. Inside, the air is warm even in winter. Brass pipes hum gently. The incubators gleam under their lamps. Rows of tiny lives pulse with fragile rhythm, lungs opening, hearts learning to keep time with the world. Martin Couney moves quietly among them, his footsteps muffled by the wooden floor. Years have gathered on his shoulders, yet his movements still hold purpose. A ritual of devotion repeated without weariness. Each child before him is both miracle and reminder that compassion, when stubborn enough, becomes endurance. The year is 1910. The world outside grows louder, faster, more modern. But here, in this small corner of the carnival, time stands still, kept company by nurses in white, by the sigh of machines, by the faint music of survival. They are the hidden orchestra of mercy. These nurses who work in shifts through heat and storm. They feed the infants through glass tubes, measure their tiny limbs, whisper lullabies in languages from across the sea. One hums an old Yiddish tune, another sings in French. Together, their voices weave a kind of prayer, one not written in any scripture, but inscribed in every gesture of care. The boardwalk roars beyond the walls. There are parades, fireworks, brass bands, the pulse of a nation drunk on novelty. Yet visitors still find their way to Couney's door. A mother from Brooklyn clutching a blanket, a father from Philadelphia with hope written in trembling eyes. They bring their children not to the hospitals. Those places have already said no. Too small, they are told. Too weak, not viable. But Couney never says no. He opens the door, always. Behind the curtain, he and his nurses receive each child as though the universe itself had arrived for tending. Every admission begins with silence. The moment when a parent hands their newborn across the threshold is a crossing between despair and faith. The nurses take the baby, swaddle it, measure its weight, sometimes less than 2 pounds, and place it within the soft glow of an incubator. The hiss of warm air fills the room. Slowly, the blue turns to pink. The faint chest rises, falls. A miracle, repeated so often that even the word miracle begins to feel small. Couney records everything in his notebook. He never forgets a name. Each one, he says, as a chapter of its own. The cost of it all is immense. The electricity, the staff, the imported machinery. Yet he never takes payment from a single parent. The quarters from the crowd sustain the entire operation. The fairgoers who come for curiosity become unwitting patrons of compassion. It is one of history's quietest ironies that mercy found its lifeline in spectacle. Over the years, the exhibit becomes both refuge and legend. Newspapers print photographs, the incubators lined up in spotless rows, the nurses tending with serene concentration, the doctor standing watch. One article calls it the sideshow that outshone the scientists. Another writes, "The babies of Coney Island are alive because one man refused to stop believing." Yet for all the attention, Couney remains humble, even wary. When journalists ask about his show, he shakes his head gently. "It is not a show," he says. "It is life under glass." He works from dawn until the last light fades from the sea. Visitors often see him standing by the incubators long after closing, reading thermometers, adjusting dials, writing notes by lamplight. He never leaves until the last infant is stable, the last nurse relieved. There are losses too. Nights when the machines hum in vain, when the hush inside the pavilion becomes heavy with grief. On those nights, Couney stands at the window and stares out toward the dark ocean. He never speaks of it, but his eyes carry the weight of a father who has learned to love the fragile without the promise of keeping them. Still, the numbers grow. By 1915, hundreds of infants have passed through his doors. The vast majority go home alive. Parents write letters that fill boxes beneath his desk. Letters filled with gratitude, with the first words of children who once could not even breathe on their own. One such letter comes from a woman named Esther. Her daughter, born 2 months early, had been given no chance. Couney took her in, fed her, warmed her, watched over her. Now, in neat handwriting, the mother writes, "She has just learned to walk. When she falls, she laughs. You gave her the world to fall upon." Couney reads it aloud to his nurses one evening. No one speaks. The incubators hum, and then one of the nurses, a young woman named Margaret who has been with him since his early days in Paris, says softly, "This is what the world calls a sideshow, doctor. But it feels like church." He smiles faintly. "Then let us keep the candles burning." The years continue to unfurl. New faces join his staff. The babies grow, their names carried away like prayers into the cities beyond. Some of them return as children, tugging at their mother's hands, pointing to the place where they once slept behind glass. Couney lifts them up, marveling at their laughter, their energy. "You see," he says quietly to onlookers, "this is what hope looks like when it grows taller. Through wars, recessions, and ridicule, he never stops. When money runs short, he finds ways, borrowing, persuading, performing small miracles of accounting. When storms strike, he protects the machines before himself. He believes that the fragile deserve the fiercest defense. And always, the laughter of the boardwalk continues outside, a strange counterpoint to the solemn music within. The carousel spins, the crowds shout, the lights blaze. But inside, beneath the steady breath of the incubators, another kind of spectacle endures. One that never seeks applause. Sometimes, when the fair closes for the night, Couney steps outside for air. The sea murmurs beside the boardwalk, and the wind carries fragments of conversation, of joy, of grief. He looks back at his pavilion, glowing softly in the dark, and thinks of how strange it is that such a place exists at all. That amidst the noise of amusement, there can be a silence so sacred. He knows that the world may never give him credit. He has made peace with that. Recognition, after all, is only another form of applause. What he desires most cannot be written in headlines. That one day, hospitals will do what he does, without hesitation, without question. That the sight of a premature infant will no longer summon pity, but purpose. The exhibit runs through the roaring 20s, through hardship and joy, through the years when America itself seems to race toward its own impossible dream. For many, Coney Island is an escape, a place to forget the struggles of the world. For Couney, it is the opposite, a place to remember what truly matters. By the time the decade closes, over 6,000 infants have been cared for within his walls. The survival rate is astonishing. Medical institutions begin to take notice, cautiously at first, then with quiet admiration. Still, few dare to admit that the carnival doctor, the so-called charlatan, has changed the course of neonatal care. He does not mind. He has long learned that truth does not need recognition to endure. It only needs to keep breathing, and so he does what he has always done. He opens the door, tends the fragile, and lets the world's laughter pass by like wind on the sea. Outside, the boardwalk glitters like an unending festival. Inside, the hum of mercy continues, small, steady, eternal. But behind the glass and applause, another truth begins to stir: the cost of such devotion. The years roll into shadow. The world that once danced beneath carnival lights now trudges through hunger and worry. It is the 1930s, the age when breadlines stretch longer than boardwalks and laughter feels like a luxury no one can afford. The carousel still spins on Coney Island, but its music is thinner now, its paint chipped by salt and time. Where there was once wonder, there is weariness. And yet, behind one modest door on the midway, something endures. The sign above the entrance reads, "Infant incubators with living infants." It is smaller now, the bulbs dimmed to save electricity, but the meaning shines unchanged. Inside, the air is warm and soft, thick with the rhythm of breath and the low hum of machinery. The Depression has stripped the world of its comfort, but here, Martin Couney still believes in mercy. He stands in the familiar glow of glass and light, his hair graying, his eyes steady. Around him, nurses move quietly, tending to tiny forms wrapped in white cotton. The world outside is collapsing in hunger and doubt, yet Couney's hands remain sure. He has seen too much to lose faith now. Each morning begins the same way. The doors open. The crowd trickles in. Some pay the quarter admission. Most do not. The ones who can't afford it are waved in anyway, and in the back, parents arrive carrying baskets, boxes, or blankets, their faces drawn with hope and exhaustion. The mothers come from every corner of the city: Harlem, Brooklyn, the Bronx, some on foot, some on borrowed train fare. They carry babies no hospital will take, premature, frail, forgotten. For them, Couney's pavilion is the last door still open in a world closing its fists. He takes each infant without question. "What's her name?" he asks gently. "Lydia." One mother whispers, her voice trembling. "She was born 2 months too soon." Coney nods. "She'll stay here," he says. "Well, take care of her. There are no fees, no conditions, only care." The depression has eaten away his savings, but he keeps the incubators running with what little comes from visitors. The shows outside grow louder, gaudier, cheap distractions for weary souls. But inside his quiet hall, time slows. The sound of coins dropping into a ticket box fades beneath the stronger rhythm of heartbeats surviving against the odds. Sometimes, the cold enters even here. On certain nights, when the Atlantic winds bite through the cracks of the wooden building, Couney walks the rows of incubators with a blanket over his shoulders, checking the thermometers, adjusting the heat. The babies sleep inside their glass cocoons, faces faintly pink under the lamps. He thinks of the world outside. Men huddled around fires in barrels, newspapers blowing down empty streets, factory doors locked and silent. He knows that some of the fathers of these infants are out there now, searching for work. Some will never find it, but their children, he vows, will find tomorrow. He writes no invoices, no requests for charity. Every child saved is its own payment. He tells a journalist who visits one day, notebook in hand. The reporter looks around the ward, surprised. "But how do you keep it going?" "The world's falling apart, doctor. No one can afford to be generous anymore." Couney smiles faintly. That's when generosity matters most. The man scribbles the quote, but when the article appears, it is buried beneath stories of stock markets and bread riots. Still, a few read it, a few come, a few leave changed. The nurses, young women in crisp, white uniforms, work tirelessly, often sleeping in narrow cots beside the ward. They are the quiet engine of the place. Couney treats them as family. They share simple meals: soup, stale bread, the rare fruit. When supplies run low, he pawns small things: his watch, his cufflinks, but never once lets the incubators go dark. Every life is sacred, he reminds them, every breath a rebellion against despair. And in those years, rebellion is what kindness becomes. There are nights when thunder cracks over the Atlantic, when the boardwalk empties in a rush of rain and the lights flicker. In those moments, Couney stands by the door, watching the storm through the glass. He remembers Berlin, the first exhibition of hope. He remembers the laughter, the ridicule, the doubt. He remembers what it took to bring this fragile miracle across an ocean. All of it was worth it, he thinks, for this, a room full of small, steady heartbeats that refuse to surrender to the cold. Outside, Coney Island withers, but does not die. The bright posters fade, the rides creak with age. But on summer days, the boardwalk still fills with families chasing brief joy. Children with pennies buy saltwater taffy. The air smells of popcorn and sea spray. Some of them wander into Couney's pavilion out of curiosity. They peer through the glass, expecting spectacle, and find silence instead. A nurse adjusts a tiny mask. Another feeds an infant through a tube no thicker than a thread. The visitors fall quiet. The noise of the carnival fades to a distant murmur, and for a moment, even in the heart of the depression, all returns. The mothers who come each day begin to recognize one another. They share stories, prayers, and small victories. Some babies gain weight, their skin turning from pale to pink. Others do not make it. When one is lost, Couney closes the curtains, his shoulders heavy, his voice low. "We gave her every chance," he whispers. "That is all anyone can do." Then he turns back to the others, to the ones still fighting. His grief becomes fuel, his mercy becomes ritual. As the decade deepens, word spreads that his is the only place still taking premature infants without charge. Hospitals are overcrowded, understaffed, unwilling to risk the expense. Yet Couney's doors remain open. He knows he cannot save them all. But that has never been the measure of worth. Some nights, when the building grows still, he sits alone by the incubators, notebook open, writing the children's names in careful script. Each one has a line, a date, a note. He keeps them all, bound in worn leather. A quiet archive of hope. Years later, historians will call it one of the most complete records of premature care in the early 20th century. But for him, it is not a ledger of science, it is a prayer book. Each name is a life he has refused to let the world forget. One winter, a storm sweeps across the coast, tearing at the boardwalk, breaking glass, flooding the lower floors of the pavilion. The newspapers say it is one of the worst in decades. When the wind dies and morning comes, Couney walks through the wreckage. The air smells of salt and splintered wood. Inside, the incubators stand unharmed, their lights still burning. The nurses weep with relief. He turns to them, smiling through exhaustion. "We've survived another storm," he says softly. "So have they." They rebuild with borrowed tools, salvaged nails, the kindness of neighbors. The world outside still reels in hardship, but here, the light never goes out. By the end of the decade, more than 6,000 babies have passed through his care. Many live against every prediction. A few even return years later, walking, talking, laughing. The once impossible now ordinary. Couney greets each with tears in his eyes. "You grew," he says, marveling as if seeing proof of a miracle he had almost forgotten how to believe in. And though the fairgrounds crumble, though the crowds thin to ghosts, his pavilion remains open. The door, like his heart, refuses to close. He knows the world is hardening, that new storms, darker ones, are gathering across the ocean. But he also knows that even in an age of despair, there will always be those who keep a small light burning. Outside, the wind gathers again, carrying whispers of a new kind of storm, one not born of hunger, but of war. And as the waves strike the shore, Martin Couney looks out across the dark horizon, wondering how much light a single man can hold before the world goes dark again. It is the summer of 1943, a season of noise and shadow. Across the ocean, cities burn. Across the boardwalk, laughter tries to sound the same. The world is at war again, and yet here, on Coney Island, the air still smells of salt and sugar. The carousel spins, though its paint has faded. Soldiers on leave walk arm in arm with girls in bright dresses, trying to forget for a few hours that tomorrow they may be gone. And in the middle of it all, just beyond the roller coasters and the games of chance, stands a quiet building with a modest sign. Infant incubators with living infants. The words have weathered decades of sun and salt. The bulbs that once shimmered in golden light now flicker weakly. But behind the door, the air is as warm as ever, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Dr. Martin Couney moves slowly now. His hair has thinned to silver, and his hands, though still steady, carry the weight of years. Yet his eyes, those calm, sea-coloured eyes, still hold that same light, the one that never belonged to spectacle, but to faith. He opens the door each morning as he always has. The scent of antiseptic and milk greets him, soft and familiar. The incubators hum like a choir of small machines, each one glowing faintly. Inside, premature infants rest beneath the lamps, their tiny limbs moving like whispers in sleep. Couney pauses at the first row and listens. He does not need charts or instruments. He listens to the silence between breaths, the faint murmur of life insisting on staying. For almost half a century, this has been his world, not the bright chaos of the carnival outside, but this small sanctuary of warmth and defiance. He has saved more lives than he can count, though he has never tried to count them. He has never asked for payment. The world once called his work a sideshow. Now it calls it medicine. But he knows the truth. It was always mercy wearing a borrowed costume. The world beyond the boardwalk has changed. Hospitals across America now have incubators of their own. Doctors once skeptical now write papers filled with statistics, diagrams, and sterile precision. The care that began here, among ticket booths and carousel songs, has become a science, clean and respectable. And because of that, Couney's strange ministry is no longer needed. He feels it in the thinning crowds. The families who once came in desperation now go to hospitals. The curious who once paid a quarter to see miracles now pass by without stopping. Even the nurses, loyal, steady, speak quietly of new opportunities, new wards, new cities. He does not blame them. This, after all, was the dream, that the world would one day make him obsolete. Still, when he walks the empty hallway at closing time, he feels something deeper than pride. It is a kind of grief, the soft grief that comes when a purpose begins to fade, not from failure, but from fulfillment. That summer, the war looms everywhere. Ration lines stretch across the city. The sky fills with searchlights. Sometimes the boardwalk goes dark for blackouts, the sea swallowing the light in silence. Couney stands by the window then, watching the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, ships carry soldiers across the Atlantic, boys who were once as small and fragile as the ones behind his glass. He thinks of the babies he saved in 1917, the ones who grew into men, now wearing uniforms. Perhaps some of them are out there now, walking into history's storm. The thought humbles him. It always has. When he returns to the nursery, the machines seem to glow brighter against the darkness. The hum of the incubators sounds like prayer, a soft, persistent refusal to surrender to chaos. He moves from one to another, touching the glass lightly as he passes. "You're safe," he murmurs. "Sleep." A nurse, young enough to be his granddaughter, looks up. "Dr. Coney," she says gently, "you should rest." He smiles. "I will. Just a little later." Rest for him has never been rest. It has always meant continuing a little longer. Sometimes visitors still come. Not the curious, but the grateful. One afternoon, a woman in her 30s arrives with a boy of about 10. She stands uncertainly at the door. the sound of the fare washing in from behind her. "Dr. Cooney," she asks. He turns, blinking. "Yes, my mother said you saved me. Here." He studies her face, the curve of her smile, the quiet strength of her gaze, and suddenly he sees the infant she once was, the tiny form he must have lifted into an incubator decades ago. His throat tightens. "You were one of mine," he whispers. She nods. "I wanted my son to see." To tell him there was a time when people didn't believe babies like me could leave. Couney bends down to look at the boy. "And yet, here you both are," he says softly. "Proof enough for the world." When they leave, he sits for a while in silence, his eyes wet with gratitude. He does not need medals or degrees. This, the return of the once forgotten, is honor enough. Outside, the last summer of Coney Island burns bright with false joy. The Ferris wheel still turns, music drifts over the sea. But war has made the crowds restless, their laughter edged with fear. Soldiers toss coins to the barkers, kiss strangers, vanish into the dark. The fair has always been a mirror of the world, both glittering and desperate. And Couney, in his small, steady way, remains its conscience. He sits by the incubators as night falls, the sounds of the boardwalk fading to a low hum. The babies sleep on, unaware of history. Their tiny chests rise and fall with the calm of oceans that do not care for politics or pride. He thinks of all the faces he has seen. The mothers who wept, the nurses who stayed through storms, the skeptics who became believers. He thinks of the glass that separated life from loss, of the fragile warmth that carried thousands into the future. He knows that soon this room will be dismantled, the machines will be sold or scrapped, the last ticket stub will fall to dust. But the light, that quiet, trembling light that once shone on tiny faces, will live on. He feels it already, glowing somewhere far away. In hospitals, in nurseries, in the unseen hands of doctors and nurses who never knew his name. That, he decides, is enough. One evening near the end of summer, he walks alone through the pavilion after closing. The windows are open, the air thick with the scent of salt and dusk. The machines hum softly. The babies sleep. He takes off his coat, folds it neatly on a chair, and walks the length of the ward. He pauses by each incubator, remembering not just the child inside, but every child who came before. Thousands of faces drift through his mind, some blurred by time, others as clear as the day he first saw them. He whispers to them all, "You lived. You made it. The world is yours now." At the far end of the hall, he stops and looks back. The room glows with pale golden light, still, serene, eternal. For a moment, it feels like a cathedral. The sound of the machines blends with the distant music of the boardwalk, a strange, holy harmony. He closes his eyes. In that stillness, he feels the presence of every nurse who ever worked beside him, every mother who ever prayed, every child who ever fought to stay. This is his legacy, not fame, not fortune, but breath. He takes one last long look, as though committing it all to memory. Then he turns off the lights. Outside, the boardwalk is alive with the noise of wartime America, brass bands, laughter, the cry of gulls. He walks slowly into the crowd, his white hair catching the last light of the setting sun. Behind him, the small building stands in shadow, its bulbs flickering once before going out. The world beyond the boardwalk will move on, carrying his light without his name. And as the carnival fades into memory, a new kind of story begins, of how the forgotten doctor's mercy will outlive even the war's fire. echoing softly into the years of remembrance yet to come. The 1940s dawn with a quieter kind of wonder. The world has grown older, more cautious. The bright brass of the carnival is tarnished now, its songs dimmed by the slow ate of depression. But somewhere beyond the crash of waves, in hospitals that once turned him away, Martin Couney's vision begins to take root. In ward after ward, the soft hiss of oxygen mingles with the sighs of infants. Machines hum. Nurses move with practiced grace. Doctors, once certain of the hopelessness of these tiny lives, begin to lean close, to study the fragile rhythms that Couney had long learned to trust. They no longer call it a sideshow. They call it medicine. It is strange how change begins. Not with thunder, but with whispers. In Paris, in London, in New York, medical journals begin to speak the language of warmth and patience. They describe the incubator as an apparatus of modern necessity, a phrase that would have once drawn laughter. The very idea that a premature child could live, that its frail body could be coaxed towards survival, is now described as miraculous, but possible. And yet, for the man who made it possible, there is no applause. Martin Couney walks unseen through this new world of acceptance, his name absent from the papers, his work often reduced to rumour. But perhaps he does not need recognition. Perhaps to him, the sight of progress is its own quiet hymn. Still, there are moments, small, unguarded moments, when the weight of being forgotten touches him. He walks through the halls of a modern hospital one winter morning, his steps slower now, his hair touched with silver. On the nursery wall hangs a poster, a diagram of the very incubator he once displayed at fairs. He stands before it silently, tracing the outline of its vents and valves with his eyes. A young doctor, passing by, barely glances at him. "Have you seen one in use?" Couney asks softly. The doctor smiles politely. "Of course. A French invention, I believe. Fairly new." Couney nods, though his heart trembles with an old ache. "Yes," he says. "Fairly new?" He leaves without another word. Outside, snow begins to fall, slow, deliberate flakes that vanish as they touch the wet streets. He turns up his collar and walks toward the pier, the cold wind tugging at his coat. The ocean before him is the same that once carried him from Europe, the same restless water that mirrored the laughter of Coney Island. Time has rolled on, but the rhythm of the waves feels unchanged. They remind him that everything new is only old light reborn. The decade advances, and with it, the language of compassion changes shape. Hospitals begin to open dedicated, premature wards. Nurses trained under new protocols speak of temperature regulation and controlled feeding, echoing lessons Couney taught long ago through action, not theory. For the first time, medical institutions take ownership of hope, but the irony is gentle, and he bears it with grace. He attends medical conferences when he can, sitting quietly at the back. Sometimes he hears his methods discussed in careful, academic tones, their origins unmentioned. He watches as charts are drawn, as words like viability and neonatology enter the conversation. He does not interrupt. He simply listens, his eyes steady, his hands folded in his lap. To some, he remains a curiosity, to others, a myth. Was he really a doctor? One man whispers after a lecture. Or just a showman with a heart? Both could be true. Couney thinks the show was never for spectacle. It was for survival. If the world needed wonder to believe in mercy, then wonder was the language he would speak. He thinks often of Bedtime, his old mentor in Paris, who once said, the smallest child deserves the greatest care. Boudin had believed in the science. Couney believed in the soul that carried it. Between them stood a bridge, invisible, but enduring, that carried fragile lives across centuries of doubt. There are evenings when former patients visit the boardwalk, grown now, walking hand in hand with children of their own. They pause where the pavilion once stood, now an empty space of sand and salt. Some of them know the story, most do not. They might have heard their parents mention a doctor, a carnival, a glass box filled with warmth. They might even recall a photograph, a nurse smiling down at a baby no bigger than her palm. But the details blur with time. Still, in their hearts, a strange gratitude lingers. For someone they never met, yet who somehow gave them everything. In those same years, newspapers begin to publish new kinds of stories. Headlines that once sneered now read, "Incubator care saves infant. New hospital wing opens in Chicago. Doctors report success with premature birth treatment." It is as if the world has awakened from a long dream of disbelief, rubbing its eyes, astonished to see what compassion has built in its sleep. For Couney, the awakening is both beautiful and bittersweet. He sees the arc of his life mirrored in every crib, every nurse's steady hands. He has lived long enough to see his vision absorbed into the world, to watch the extraordinary become ordinary. There is peace in that, even if history has misplaced his name. On a quiet night, he sits by his window overlooking the darkened amusement park. The sounds are faint now, just the echo of waves and the distant creak of the boardwalk. His daughter, Hildegard, has grown into a capable nurse, carrying forward his gentle defiance. She is the living thread between what was and what will be. "Do you think they'll ever remember?" she asks him once, her voice soft. "Perhaps," he says, "but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they remember the children." He smiles faintly, the kind of smile that holds both loss and love. The lamplight glows across his face, the same glow that once shimmered on glass, surrounding the smallest of lives. The world may have forgotten the man, but the light remains. Beyond the walls of his room, the city hums with a new confidence. The world is changing again. Electricity fills the streets, airplanes thread the skies. Yet somewhere, in a quiet hospital ward, a nurse watches over a premature infant and adjusts the dial of an incubator, not realizing that the rhythm she follows is the same heartbeat that began on a carnival midway decades before. Martin Couney's story is fading from memory, but its echo grows louder in practice. Every life saved carries a fragment of his defiance, every gentle hand a reflection of his stubborn belief that no life is too small to fight for. The world has awakened, yes, but in awakening, it forgets to look back at who first lit the dawn, and so he continues in his own quiet way, walking the line between myth and memory, not seeking gratitude, only peace. He knows that history moves like the tide. Sometimes it brings back what it has taken, sometimes it buries it deeper beneath the sand. But compassion, he believes, never truly disappears. It only changes form, finding new vessels, new names, new hearts. The hum of the hospital replaces the music of the midway, yet the melody is the same. A song of life refusing to fade. And as the light of one age dims, another begins to glow, carrying Martin Couney's unseen flame into the storm years to come. The sea still whispers outside his window. It is softer now, as though time itself has grown tired of roaring. The boardwalk has changed. The laughter has thinned, the carousel's music has long since fallen quiet. Where once the crowd pressed close to see his miracles, only wind moves now, scattering sand across old footprints no one remembers to trace. Martin Couney sits near the window, wrapped in a shawl too large for his frame. His hands, the same that once steadied fragile cradles of glass, tremble slightly as he lifts his teacup. The cup clinks softly against its saucer, the sound like a heartbeat fading into stillness. He is in his late 70s now. His beloved exhibit has closed, the world has moved on. Incubators hum in hospitals across the nation, their design perfected, their presence unquestioned. But few remember where they began, or the man who first believed that the smallest lives could survive. He watches the horizon, remembering another light, the incandescent glow of his pavilion at night. The hum of electricity, the murmur of nurses, the breath of the newborns that filled those rooms with a kind of music he never forgot. For nearly half a century, those children had been his symphony, his defiance against despair. Now the music is memory. Sometimes he dreams of them. The infants who grew into laughter, into limbs that ran and reached, into lives that stretched far beyond the edge of his knowing. In the dream, they walked toward him. Hundreds of them, their faces blurring into one another, eyes bright and forgiving. He always wakes before they reach him. His daughter, Hildegard, visits often. She brings food, tidies his papers, fusses over his worn spectacles. She has grown into a strong, practical woman, the only child he ever truly allowed to stay close. In her, he sees both the tenderness of his work and the resilience it demanded. She sometimes asks if he regrets it. The showmanship, the criticism, the years spent beside popcorn stands instead of in hospital halls. He smiles faintly. No, he says. Because where else would they have lived? For a long moment, she studies him, as if trying to memorize the answer. The quiet conviction that once lit entire rooms. In truth, Couney has very little left. His savings are meager, spent on the children he refused to turn away. His medical credentials, long questioned, have never been fully validated. Some still whisper that he was a showman who stumbled into sainthood by accident. Others, those who know better, remember a man who gave everything and asked for nothing. But he does not dwell on titles. He never truly cared for the approval of the institutions that had ignored dying infants for so long. His heart remains tethered to simpler things. A child's cry turning to laughter, a mother's trembling hand finding peace. He remembers the early days, the small pavilion in Berlin, the disbelief on people's faces when they saw tiny, premature infants breathing within glass chambers. They came out of curiosity, left in silence. Some wept. He remembers thinking that maybe compassion, like light, could pass through glass, that even a spectacle could become a sanctuary. And then America, the great gamble. The voyage across the Atlantic, the boardwalks alive with wonder, the skeptics, the ridicule, the endless work, thousands of nights with no rest, listening to the faint hum of machines, praying they would hold. He had built something beautiful out of the world's noise. A quiet rebellion made visible. But he knows now that beauty does not last as light does. It fades, not because it was unworthy, but because time makes room for new stories. The doctor who once stood at the edge of miracles now fades into the soft anonymity of history. Yet in this anonymity, there is peace. He leans back in his chair, watching the play of light across the floor. It reminds him of the incubator glow, that warm, golden promise that tomorrow might come. Sometimes letters still arrive. They come from strangers, from grown men and women who begin their words with gratitude and disbelief. Dear Dr. Couney, my mother told me you saved my life when I was no bigger than a hand. I am 40 now. I have children of my own. I wish I could have thanked you sooner. He keeps these letters in a small wooden box by his bed. They are the only trophies he has ever wanted. When sleep evades him, he takes them out and reads them slowly, tracing the ink with his fingertips. The handwriting differs, some careful and elegant, some hurried and unsteady, but the message is always the same. You mattered, we lived, and that is enough. Once, he had stood beneath the great wheel of the Coney Island Ferris, watching the lights shimmer on the sea. He used to think that life was like that, a circle of wonder and loss, of ascent and descent, endlessly revolving. Now, at the edge of his years, he understands that the circle was never his to complete. It was enough to keep it turning. The world beyond his window is quieter now. The laughter of the midway has given way to the slow rhythm of tides. The scent of salt drifts in through the cracked pane, and somewhere far off, a carousel creaks, a ghost of the music that once wrapped his days. He thinks often of the nurses who stood beside him, steadfast, gentle women who cradled the smallest lives with unshakable devotion. They, too, have faded from record. Their names lost, their kindness unmeasured, but in his heart their presence is still near. A choir of soft voices carrying through time. There are moments when doubt flickers. Not about the children, never about them, but about himself. Did he deceive the world to do good? Did he cross lines he shouldn't have? Did it matter if the result was life? He remembers Boudin, his old teacher in Paris, saying once that medicine is half science and half faith. Couney had chosen faith when science turned away. Perhaps that was his crime and also his salvation. The light fades slowly in the room. Hildegard lights a small lamp by his bedside. Its glow spills gently across the walls, reflecting in his eyes, the same way incubator light once reflected off glass. He smiles faintly. "Do you hear it?" he asks her. She tilts her head. "Hear what?" "The babies." "The humming." She says nothing. She only takes his hand, cool and fragile now, and holds it in silence. In that quiet, he feels no regret, only an immense stillness, the kind that follows long labor, long love, long defiance. His life has been a long vigil for others' dawns, and now the morning is no longer his to keep. Outside, the sea sighs once more. If legacy is measured not in wealth, but in the warmth one leaves behind, then Martin Couney is rich beyond reckoning. His work has dissolved into the daily miracle of hospital wards, into the machines that hum beside every premature child. No plaque, no monument could hold what he has given, because his monument breathes. He closes his eyes. The wind shifts. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughs, high and clear, like the chime of light on glass. He smiles as if recognizing the sound. The measure of a man, he thinks, is not what the world remembers, but what it continues to live because of him. And with that thought, he rests. Night gathers around his window, but the quiet glow within endures. A light not of spectacle, but of mercy. And as the world beyond begins to forget his name, that tender glow remains, waiting to be found again. Not in fame, but in the living proof of all he saved. When the boardwalk goes quiet, he fades with it. The crowds have gone home. The laughter that once rolled like ocean waves has vanished into memory. What remains of Martin Couney's world is scattered. A few yellowed photographs, some rusted incubator parts, a handful of news clippings that call him the infant showman. In the new hospitals of post-war America, incubators now stand in clean, white rows. They hum the same warm hum his machines once did, but no one remembers the man who first made them sing. History has an odd habit of polishing what it chooses to remember. It loves perfection, credentials, and proof, not miracles performed in tents by a man the establishment never fully trusted. Couney's name slips quietly out of the medical journals. In the years after his exhibit closes, the story of his life begins to unravel like a tapestry left in the sun. Some say he was a fraud, that he had no medical degree, that he invented his own legend. Others say he was a showman first, a doctor second. A few whisper that he never studied in Paris, that the letters after his name were smoke and charm. The truth is elusive. A little like him. He was born in Europe, yes. He studied under Pierre Boudin, perhaps. Or perhaps he only watched, learning not through certificates but through witnessing. There is no record clear enough to prove either story. But there are thousands of living records breathing proof in every corner of the world. Men and women who once fit in the palm of a hand. They do not have his diploma. They have his life. In his final years, Couney lives quietly in Brooklyn with his daughter Hildegard, the nurse who once stood beside him in white uniform, steady and sure. They leave modestly, without wealth, surrounded by keepsakes from the old exhibit. Sometimes, on slow afternoons, he takes out a small box of letters, thank you notes from parents whose children survived because of him. Some are scrawled on cheap paper, others come on fine stationery embossed with gold initials. All say the same thing, in one form or another. You saved our baby, we can never repay you. He reads them not for pride, but for memory. Each letter is a flicker of the old warmth, the hum of machines, the soft cries of life beginning. In the silence of age, these words keep him company. When visitors occasionally come, reporters seeking a strange story, doctors curious about the myth, they find not the flamboyant showman of old, but an elderly man who smiles softly and says, I only gave them a chance to live. The rest was up to them. He does not defend himself against those who doubt. He has no need. The truth he knows will never rest in documents. It leaves in breath. By the late 1940s, the fairgrounds that once housed his exhibit have been torn down. The boardwalk is quieter, the laughter more brittle. America is moving on, toward neon and television, toward rockets and cold wars. The small miracles of Coney Island seem quaint now, almost absurd. Yet somewhere, in hospitals across the nation, nurses adjust incubators that trace their design directly to his own. The brass knobs, the double-walled glass, the oxygen flow, all born from the experiments of a man who once kept his patients beside the smell of popcorn and sea spray. He does not patent his machines. He never sought ownership. For him, saving lives was not an invention, but an offering. Perhaps that is why history forgets him so easily, because he asked for nothing in return. When he dies in 1950, the newspapers offer only brief notices. Dr. Martin Couney, exhibitor of premature infants, dies at 80. A few lines, a faint acknowledgement, quickly lost among the headlines of war and reconstruction. No mention of the thousands saved. No mention of how his unorthodox compassion shaped the practice of neonatology. Even his grave is modest, marked only by his name and dates. There are no honors, no foundations, no statues, just a quiet patch of earth where a man who once filled glass boxes with light now rests beneath it. But the silence does not mean the end, because the story does not stop where the ink does. In the decades that follow, his graduates, as he called them, grow up. They become soldiers and teachers, nurses and poets. Some raise children of their own, whispering to them, "You were almost never here." A few try to find him, to write, to thank, to remember. But by then, the trail has grown cold. The letters return unanswered. The world has already rewritten his story in the margins. Still, when they tell their children about the strange doctor who once saved their lives inside a carnival tent, the words carry a kind of reverence. It is the reverence reserved for saints no one canonized. In them, his work continues, anonymous, eternal, quietly pulsing in the bloodstream of time. Years later, historians will stumble across his story again. They will find the photographs, the rows of tiny infants behind glass, the nurses in white caps, the crowds gazing in wonder. Some will be fascinated, others skeptical. They will argue over whether he was a doctor or a showman, a genius or a fraud. But none will deny what cannot be denied. Those babies lived, and perhaps that is the truest measure of legacy. Not the permanence of a name, but the persistence of its mercy. The forgotten doctor does not need statues or headlines. His legacy is invisible but living, passed quietly from breath to breath, generation to generation. The air that once warmed those fragile bodies now fills the lungs of their children's children. The world, unknowingly, still inhales his work. In the stillness of history, Couney's life becomes something like a parable. A man unrecognized by his peers saves thousands by defying them. A showman becomes a savior. A carnival becomes a chapel. And when the light fades, what remains is not the noise, but the warmth. Every act of goodness, he once said, is like holding a match to the dark. You may not see the flame for long, but somewhere it lit another hand. If the world never learned his full story, it is because the story was never about him. It was about those who lived. And so, even forgotten, he wins. History forgets names more easily than it forgets mercy. And somewhere beyond his quiet grave, a new age of medicine rises. Sterile, shining, unknowing, carrying his invisible fingerprints into the modern dawn. The world has changed. The boardwalk of Coney Island hums differently now. The rides quieter, the laughter thinner, the lights softer against a horizon of memory. The carnival that once pulsed with colour and sound has aged, like an old photograph fading at the edges. But somewhere amid the dust of archives and the echo of ocean wind, a story stirs. It begins not with a doctor, but with a question. In a small newsroom in the 1970s, a journalist named Dawn, curious, tender-eyed, drawn to forgotten things, comes across a curious headline from a half-century earlier. The infant incubator exhibit babies on display at Coney Island. The words feel almost absurd, almost cruel, until she reads further and finds that these displays were not curiosities, but sanctuaries. She wonders, what happened to those children? And with that question, she begins to follow a thread. Her search takes her into libraries and long corridors of hospital records. So many names are missing. The babies too small for birth certificates, their survival uncertain, their beginnings written in the margins of history. But then, slowly, one story surfaces. Then another. Then another. A woman named Lucille, now in her 50s, remembers her mother telling her the story, how she was born too soon, no bigger than a rabbit, and taken to a strange place by the sea. Her mother wept on the train to Brooklyn, clutching hope like a paper ticket. They told me he would save her, she said. That doctor with the glass boxes. Lucille laughs softly when she tells Dawn this. Can you imagine? A carnival. My first lullaby was the sound of a carousel. Another woman, Irene, recalls visiting Coney Island years later as a girl, pressing her hand against the warm glass of the exhibit, never realizing that she herself had once been inside it. I think he must have loved us, she whispers, even though he didn't know us. One by one, the incubator babies begin to appear scattered across the map. Teachers, artists, engineers, mothers, fathers. Some speak with wonder, others with disbelief. Many never knew the full story of how they lived. They were told only that their parents took them to a doctor who didn't ask for money, only faith. Through their voices, Martin Couney begins to live again. The journalist listens as these memories unfold like soft music, stories of parents waiting outside the exhibit gates, too poor to afford hospital care, of nurses who sang lullabies over the hum of machinery, of tiny infants whose lives balanced on the rhythm of a fan and the warmth of a lamp. One mother's diary, found folded within an old family Bible, speaks of him with reverence. He said she would live if we believed. I believed because he did. Each testimony is a small resurrection, not of spectacle, but of truth. The journalist visits what remains of Coney Island's dreamland, now long vanished. The place where Couney's pavilion once stood is nothing but sand and sea breeze. She closes her eyes and tries to imagine it, the hum of electricity, the hush of nurses, the quiet defiance in the air. In her mind's eye, the glow returns, the glass boxes shining like small stars in the carnival night. She begins to write. Her article appears in a Sunday magazine, simple, human, tender. It tells of the forgotten doctor who turned compassion into performance, who saved lives while being dismissed as a showman. The headline reads, "The man who saved babies at the fair." Readers pause over their morning coffee. Some smile, some weep. Letters begin to arrive, from those who were once the size of a hand, whose first breath came in that unlikely sanctuary by the sea. I owe my life to him. One letter says, written in trembling cursive, I wish I could have thanked him. The article stirs more than nostalgia, it awakens conscience. Doctors who once learned about neonatal care in sterile classrooms now find themselves asking who first dared to believe such lives were possible. Medical journals begin to revisit his name, no longer as rumor, but as origin. His work, once dismissed as spectacle, is seen anew as foundation. In small hospitals, nurses keep pictures of the old Coney Island exhibit, not for curiosity, but for remembrance. They see in his story the truth that science alone cannot heal. That care, too, is a form of courage. The journalist returns often to that thought. She imagines Couney walking the boardwalk at dusk, his hat tipped low, the lights reflecting in his glasses. He does not know that decades later, people will speak his name with warmth. He does not know that the children he fought for will one day have children of their own. He only knows that life, fragile, flickering, deserves a chance to stay. In the silence of her apartment, she listens to the recordings of her interviews. The voices of the survivors tremble and glow. He was a good man, we were his proof. The past, it seems, has found its echo. Time softens the noise of disbelief, leaving only gratitude. The glass incubators that once stood beside popcorn, machines and roller coasters have long been replaced by sleek hospital units. The babies now rest in quiet wards, their tiny hands curled around the promise of the future. Few remember the carnival origins of that care, but the echo remains. In every neonatal ward, beneath the hum of the machines, there is a trace of Couney's dream. Each steady heartbeat is a whisper of the man who refused to turn away. The journalist ends her piece with words that feel like prayer. Once, Mercy wore a showman's coat and stood on a boardwalk by the sea. The world doubted him. The children did not. The years later, a plaque appears near the old Coney Island site, simple and unadorned, in memory of Dr. Martin Couney, the man who believed in the smallest lives. Tourists walk by, unaware. The waves rise and fall, carrying the faint echo of carousel music, of laughter, of lullabies behind glass. Somewhere, a newborn takes its first fragile breath, and the story begins again. The world remembers him now, not as a showman, but as a guardian of beginnings. And yet, before his light fades entirely into history, we must return once more to where it all began. To the quiet hush behind the glass, where the echoes his mercy still breathe, and the smallest lives continue to whisper his name. The boardwalk is almost empty now. Only the sea remains faithful, whispering in the same language it once spoke to the lights of Coney Island, to the laughter, to the music that has long since faded into memory. The waves reach for the shore like an old friend, leaving their lace of foam upon the sand before slipping back into the dark. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it, the faint hum of electricity, the rustle of nurses' skirts, the heartbeat of small machines that once glowed in the night. Once upon a time, this was the sound of defiance, the sound of a man who refused to let the world decide which lives were worth saving. Martin Couney's pavilion is gone. The roller coasters have changed their shapes. The air smells of oil and salt and something older. Nostalgia, perhaps. Tourists walk past the place where his exhibit once stood, unaware that beneath their feet, miracles once breathed in rhythm with the tide. There are no plaques marking the spot, no grand statues rising from the sand. Only memory remains, scattered among the living, carried quietly in the hearts of those who once began their lives behind the glass. In the soft light of morning, the boardwalk glows like an empty cathedral. Wooden planks creak under the weight of the wind. Somewhere, a carousel horse leans in the shadows, its paint faded, but its smile eternal. It is easy to imagine that if the world were still enough, the ghosts of the incubator ward might reappear. The hum of the heaters, the whispered prayers, the delicate flutter of small lungs finding their first rhythm. Time has folded this place into silence, but silence, sometimes, is not an absence. It is a kind of reverence. The story of Martin Couney no longer belongs to history alone. It belongs to every hospital ward where tiny hands grasp the air, to every mother who leans close to a crib and listens for the smallest breath. His name may not appear in textbooks or marble halls, but his legacy flickers in the steady glow of neonatal units around the world. Light born from glass and faith, he had once been dismissed as a showman, a fraud, some said, a man who wrapped medicine in spectacle. And yet, as the decades turned, the very science that shunned him began to follow his steps. The incubator became essential. Premature care became standard. Compassion, once laughed at, became law. It is a strange thing, how truth often arrives wearing the wrong costume. Couney's exhibits had looked like sideshows. They stood beside roller coasters and candy stalls within the laughter of strangers. Yet inside those walls, Mercy worked in silence, untouched by the noise outside. He had built sanctuaries where none were meant to exist, not in marble hospitals, but in carnival tents and boardwalk pavilions. And there, amid the scent of popcorn and the cries of the midway, thousands of children learned to breathe. They grew into the quiet people who filled the world's cities and towns. Teachers, soldiers, artists, mothers, fathers. They lived ordinary lives, unaware that their existence had once been a rebellion against despair. Their survival carried within it a whisper that every life, no matter how small, changes the shape of the world. If one were to trace the lineage of every premature child saved by modern medicine, the path would lead, softly and humbly, back here, to this wind-worn boardwalk by the sea, to the man who turned compassion into spectacle and spectacle into salvation. A story like his rarely fits into history's neat shelves. It leaves instead in echoes, in the hum of machines, the pulse of light, the hush of hospital corridors at midnight. In those moments, his work breathes again. Some say legacy is what remains when we are gone. But perhaps legacy is also what we leave unseen, the invisible thread connecting past Mercy to present hope. In the archives of medical progress, Couney's name is slowly rediscovered. Scholars write papers, historians unearth photographs. The image of his exhibit, the glowing incubators lined in rows, the nurses in white uniforms, the babies wrapped in linen, resurfaces like something sacred. Yet what the pictures cannot capture is the warmth. The warmth that filled those glass boxes, the warmth that held despair at bay, the warmth that came from a man who believed that hope, like air, could be given freely. There is something profoundly human about that, the idea that love might take the form of light and heat. That, in the midst of chaos and laughter, one could build a heaven so small and yet so infinite. The sea outside his window, the same sea that once mirrored the lights of his pavilion, keeps its rhythm. It has seen empires rise and crumble, inventions bloom and fade, generations come and go. But it has rarely seen a defiance so quiet, so stubbornly kind. When people think of Coney Island, they remember thrill and spectacle. But somewhere beneath that noise lies another kind of memory. Gentler, slower, lit from within. It is the memory of a doctor who gave his life to lives barely begun, who turned a carnival into a cradle and made the world believe in the smallest of miracles. And in that belief lies the essence of our humanity. Because compassion, too, is a kind of rebellion. To care deeply in an indifferent world is to resist extinction, not of the body, but of the spirit. Couney's story reminds us that mercy does not always wear robes or carry titles. Sometimes it stands behind a curtain on a noisy boardwalk, feeding the newborn with a dropper, whispering against the wind, "Leave, just leave." The nurse bends over the crib. The baby's chest rises and falls, faint but steady. The crowd outside cheers for a roller coaster, unaware that just a few steps away, a quieter victory unfolds, one that will ripple through decades. It is there, in that contrast, the roar and the hush, the spectacle and the silence, that the true miracle resides. Years later, when the journalists write his story and the old photographs resurface, people are astonished. They call him visionary. They call him eccentric. Some even call him saint. But the truth is simpler. He was a man who refused to stop caring. And maybe that is enough to outlast everything else. As night falls over the boardwalk, the sea darkens to glass. The air cools, and the last of the day's laughter drifts away like smoke. If you stand there long enough, you might see a faint light shimmer across the sand, as if the incubators still hum somewhere just out of sight. Perhaps they do. Perhaps every hospital light, every machine that cradles the breath of a newborn, carries a glint of that same defiant glow. A nurse adjusts a blanket. A doctor listens to the faint rhythm of a tiny heart. A mother closes her eyes and whispers a prayer. All of it, the tenderness, the faith, the waiting, began here, behind glass and laughter, on a boardwalk that once held miracles. Martin Couney's story ends as it began, not with spectacle, but with light. A light that traveled through time, changing its shape but never its purpose. A light that proved that even in the noisiest places, compassion can find room to speak softly. And if the sea could speak, it might say what Couney never could, that mercy, when given freely, becomes immortal. The tide rolls in again. The air smells of salt and memory. The sound of the waves mingles with something older. A lullaby that once drifted through the pavilion walls. The melody carries across the years, faint but enduring, as though the sea itself remembers the small breaths it once cradled. The story, like the tide, does not truly end. It only returns again and again to the same question, whispered by every newborn cry, every trembling hand that chooses care over indifference. What is the measure of a life, if not the lives it allows to continue? The sea does not answer. It only sighs, and in that sigh, you can almost hear the hum of the incubators, the warmth of the glass, and the pulse of a heart that refused to turn away. And so the boardwalk sleeps, its lights long gone, but its mercy still burning. Carried in every breath that began behind glass, for even as one story closes, another quietly begins, a newborn's cry, soft and defiant, echoing the light that never went out. And so the story closes as it began, with a small, steady light behind glass. The laughter of the midway fades into silence now, the carousel turning slowly into memory, but the warmth remains, a quiet glow in the night like an ember that refuses to die. Martin Couney's world has long since disappeared. The wooden boardwalk has weathered, the fairground lights have dimmed, and the crowds that once leaned close in wonder have drifted into history. Yet, somehow, that gentle defiance still burns. It hums in every hospital ward where a child's fragile cry is met not with despair, but with hope. It lives in every act of care that begins, as his did, with the courage to believe in life when the world does not. Every age has its skeptics. Every heart that dares to heal will be met with doubt. But still, there are those who keep tending the flame. Tonight, perhaps that is what we've done together, tended a small fire in the dark. You, here, listening, letting an old story breathe again. For a moment, across time and distance, we shared the same quiet light. Thank you for being here, for lending your stillness, your heart, your imagination. These moments of listening are small, but they ripple outward, the way Couney's compassion once did. You are part of that echo now, part of the soft, unbroken chain that carries kindness forward through time. So rest now. Let the noise of the world fall away. Let your breath grow slower, your body heavier, your thoughts softer. You've walked through laughter and wonder, through the hum of machines and the hush of mercy. And now, there is nothing left to do but drift. May your dreams carry you gently through the night. May they be lit by the same quiet faith that once glowed behind glass. The light that never went out. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in and history hums you to sleep. If this story brought you peace, you are always welcome to return. There will always be another light waiting here, another voice in the dark, whispering softly through time. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well and let the light linger.